everyone. This is Bill Griffin. Welcome to Different Take Podcast. If you like this content, please subscribe, like, share, comment. Really appreciate you watching. The war with Ukraine and Russia has been going on about 8 months now. I do this as mid-November, 8-9 months. And Joe Biden claimed at the outset that United States military forces would not be directly involved in Ukraine as combatants. Now, that could change because Joe Biden's a liar, but it may be true that the U.S. has a few combatants there now, but the public just doesn't know about it. That's possible. At any rate, this is something that happened 3-4 weeks ago. 101st Airborne Light Infantry Division was stationed on the Ukrainian border in Romania, which is a NATO ally. So this report is from CBS News. You can find this on YouTube. It's entitled U.S. 101st Airborne Division deployed near Ukraine's border.
While on the ground, we joined America's most forward troops near the Ukrainian border. The 101st Airborne Division from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, now headquartered in Europe for the first time since World War II. With Colonel Edwin Mathaidis and Brigadier General John Lubis, we board Black Hawk helicopters to the edge of NATO territory.
Why is it necessary to have the 101st here? We bring a unique capability from our air assault capabilities. It's also incredibly meaningful to us to return to Europe after 80 years away.
So even though Joe Biden says we're not going to have combatants there, they're ready to go in case in Washington establishment could turn on a dime on this. It's all about what the public will tolerate. I'll talk about that a little later in terms of war, because the United States has been involved in a lot of military interventions over a very long time. This is War Monger Liz Cheney. She is being interviewed on CBS Face Nation, corrupt media, lie all the time, talked about it many times. This you can find on YouTube also. There's a couple of questions here.
But do you agree with President Biden's strategy here that rather than go nose to nose with the Russian military, U.S. force should be completely off the table and that it should all be dependent on sanctions?
I think there are several things we need to be doing. We need to certainly be increasing the sanctions, as I've said.
So Liz Cheney asked directly, does not answer the question. You can only take it that she'd be perfectly fine with U.S. troops going to Ukraine to die. And the United States has been funneling munitions and military equipment to Ukraine in this war. This is an act of war. Russia tolerates it, of course. Russia tolerates this act of war, but it is an act of war. The distinction is that the public will accept Washington funneling this. So this is perfectly fine. They may not accept military troops there. That's perception. So we avoid that part of war, but we're going to fund the war. Now, there's precedence for doing this. I'll talk about that in a second. But first, this is Liz Cheney. Second question. Note the moderator uses the term isolationist as a pejorative. You're simple. You don't understand the world.
Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri told CBS the U.S. should not send troops to any NATO country since the U.S. can't afford it. So there is this non-interventionist, isolationist movement that President Trump himself really endorsed with America First. I mean, how do you explain to voters why that view, Republican view, is wrong?
Look, we've been down that road before. We've seen isolationism in both parties, and it's always been wrong and it's always been dangerous. America cannot defend and maintain our own freedom and security if we think that we're going to simply...
Just not as smart as Liz Cheney and the Washington establishment, politicians and the media, who always, they love war because war means ratings. So the moderator uses the term isolationist as a pejorative. It's to malign those that say, whoa, we'll use that as a last resort. Sending troops, I mean. So she says we've been down this road and it doesn't work. I don't know what she's talking about. She doesn't mention an example because there probably isn't one. We'll withdraw from the world if we don't funnel and do everything possible to defend Ukraine. We'll be withdrawing from the world, and if we don't lead, we'll be jeopardizing our nation. To participate in a war halfway across the world with a former country in the Soviet Union that is borders on Russia. So I want to talk about this term isolationist and also the prior precedent for funneling military equipment and munitions to another country, which the United States has done a lot of since World War II. The Vietnam War is probably the worst military intervention. The United States, as far as I can tell, gained absolutely nothing from this conflict except the loss of primarily loss of 58,000 men and women in Vietnam. When we eventually pulled out of Vietnam, gained absolutely nothing. When we went to Vietnam, let me back up. Went to Vietnam, that was an example of where it would have been perfectly fine to have been an isolationist. So she's saying that going down that road doesn't work. Well, it would have been nice to have gone down that road then. Isolationist comes from movement, World War II. Politicians used this to malign those that did not want to go to war, and the media jumped on board. And there was a movement which in World War I, the United States lost 116,000 fatalities in that war, and we just went to war. Woodrow Wilson was president, terrible president, got us into a war where we basically, the outcome was we're going to go back to war and we're going to lose even more men and women. So in World War II, I'm not at all saying that wasn't something that we should have participated, the United States shouldn't have participated in, but World War I, it's pretty sketchy what the United States gained out of going to that conflict. So there's a movement in the United States, it's Germany, Nazi Germany, basically takes over all of Europe pretty much, and Japan is on, they're very actively conquesting lands in East Asia, China, Korea. There was a possibility of there being war on two fronts, and the United States prepared for it, which was prudent. And one of the things that they did was they passed the Lease Act. This was 11 March 1941. The Lease Act was passed on 11 March 1941 after fierce debates and protests by isolationists. The act was a program created by the United States government which enabled the country to provide wartime aid and support to the Allied nations during World War II while the U.S. remained a neutral country. So this was 9 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, and only 3 months before Germany attacked the Soviet Union. So the United States was very prudent to prepare for the defense of our country and to aid our allies so that we would not have to fight a war on our own lands. And the primary country that this was designed to assist was Great Britain, because they were the ones that were really the last hope, if you will. And of course, when the United States entered the war, last line of defense, I should say, when they went into the war, the two countries combined with Russia or Soviet Union as an ally to defeat Nazi Germany. Well, this made kind of sense that we would funnel munitions and military equipment to Great Britain because we were in danger of eventually being attacked. That was just the way things were going. And we also prepared for war, which is very prudent. So that does not compare in the slightest to the situation in Ukraine. So the powers to be at Washington, in my opinion, would be perfectly fine with sending military troops to Ukraine. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but they would be perfectly fine if the public would accept such a thing. The public will not accept such a thing because the fact that, well, Russia has nuclear weapons, very, very well armed, and we've been through a lot of military interventions in the past 70 years since World War II ended, and we just recently got out of this situation in Afghanistan, which we've been there for 20 years. That's just recent memory. But I think one of the reasons that the Washington establishment is fine, and the Liz Cheneys of the world, and this moderator, for example, is perfectly fine with U.S. troops going to war because our military is so small and it's voluntary. There's only 1.4 million active duty. Out of a country of 350 million people, there's a small percentage of people that are directly affected. Frankly, the deaths might be few. They're frankly not affected. The vast majority of the country, you don't know someone in the military or that's close to you, and the public's convinced. They follow along. I think the only reason is that the public will not accept this is for the reason I outlined. For another country, Liz Cheney would be perfectly fine with saying out loud what she thinks, which she doesn't hear, that we ought to send U.S. troops. She's not alone in the Washington establishment for this sort of thing. Keep all options on the table. You'll hear Democrats and Republicans alike say this. And I think that the administration of Donald Trump, those 4 years, and the 8 years of Ronald Reagan, that was the way to go. That military intervention was a last resort. You exhaust all other options. And you don't get involved in places where our national interests aren't directly threatened. Liz Cheney uses the argument that, well, they're indirectly threatened because if we are not leading the world, this could happen to us. It's kind of a strange, you have to strain to understand that argument. But at any rate, hopefully we'll stay out of this conflict, and hopefully we'll stop funneling munitions and military equipment because, let's face it, it's been 8 months. If the Ukrainians can't defend themselves, they can't defend themselves. This is not the obligation of the United States to ensure that Ukraine is a sovereign country with the blood and the treasure of our country. So that's my opinion. I'm curious to know if you agree with me or not. Please comment, subscribe, share, and like if you like the content. But I'd like to hear what you think, and thanks for listening.